Some monsters are born in the shadows, lurking in the darkness where our nightmares take shape. But sometimes, the most terrifying ones walk among us, hidden in plain sight, their polite smiles masking an abyss of depravity. This is the story of Ed Gein, a quiet man from rural Wisconsin, a man who tried to bring his mother back from the dead. Edward Theodore Gein was born in 1906, into a world defined by fear, isolation, and a suffocating brand of religion. On their desolate farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed and his brother Henry were raised under the iron fist of their mother, Augusta. Her devout and domineering woman, she preached that the outside world was a pit of sin, and that all women, except for herself, were instruments of evil, vessels of temptation. His father, George, was a violent, abusive alcoholic, a ghost in his own home, whose presence was marked only by anger and neglect. Ed grew up believing sin was everywhere, a corrupting force that lurked outside the fences of their farm, outside the walls of his home, everywhere, except inside his mother. To him, Augusta was pure, a saint in a world of sinners. He was her shadow, her confidant, her devoted son, tied to her by an invisible cord of fear and adoration. He was the boy who never truly left his mother. This fragile, twisted existence was shattered in 1944. One evening, a brush fire broke out near their farm. As the flames consumed the dry fields, Ed and his brother Henry were out fighting the blaze. When it was all over, Ed ran to the police, reporting that his brother had vanished in the smoke. But when they found Henry's body, the story didn't add up. He had bruises on his head, injuries inconsistent with a fire. Some in the town whispered it was an accident. Others weren't so sure. The official cause of death was ruled asphyxiation, and the questions surrounding that night were buried with Henry. Just a year later, Augusta suffered a debilitating stroke and died. And with her death, Ed lost his only anchor, his moral compass, his only reason to live. He was finally, utterly alone. In his grief, Ed boarded up every room his mother ever used, her bedroom, the parlor, the dining room, sealing them off from the world, turning them into a pristine shrine. He covered her furniture with sheets, left flowers by her bedside, and preserved her memory as if she were merely sleeping. The rest of the house decayed around him. Dust settled like a shroud, and filth piled up in the corners. Alone in the decaying farmhouse, surrounded by the ghost of his mother, he lost himself in books about human anatomy, stories of faraway death cults, and lurid tales from pulp magazines. His profound loneliness began to fester, twisting and rotting into a grotesque obsession. He had to keep his mother close. He had to bring her back. Between 1947 and 1957, under the cover of darkness, Ed Gein began visiting the local cemeteries. He wasn't there to mourn, he was there to shop. Guided by the obituary section of the local paper, he sought out the graves of recently deceased women who, in his fractured mind, resembled his mother. He would dig them up, taking parts of their bodies back to his house of horrors. He was a craftsman of the macabre. He carved, he sewed, he stitched their remains into household objects. He made furniture out of flesh and bone, bowls from skulls, leggings from human skin, and even a woman's suit, complete with a mask made from a human face. He wore it in the moonlight, dancing and trying to channel his mother's spirit to become her. For years, the horrors remained confined to his farm, but his obsession was insatiable. In 1954, a local tavern owner, Mary Hogan, vanished from her bar. The only trace left behind was a pool of blood on the floor. Her disappearance became a local mystery, a ghost story told in hushed tones. 3 years later, on a cold November morning in 1957, Bernice Worden, the owner of the town's hardware store, disappeared. The cash register was gone, and a trail of blood led out the back door. The last receipt in her book was for a gallon of antifreeze, sold to Ed Gein. When police arrived at his isolated farmhouse, they had no idea what they were about to uncover. As they pushed open the door to his shed, their flashlights cut through the darkness, and they stepped into hell. The discovery would not only reveal the fate of Bernice Worden, but would also unearth a decade of atrocities that would forever haunt the American psyche, creating a new archetype for evil and inspiring some of the most infamous monsters in cinematic history. The quiet man from Plainfield was quiet no more. Inside, they found body parts, faces, and organs, arranged like trophies. Bernice's body was discovered in the shed, hanging upside down, field-dressed like a deer. It was no longer a home. It was a museum of death. The scene that greeted investigators was beyond their darkest nightmares. Bowls made from human skulls, a lampshade crafted from human skin, chair seats upholstered with tanned flesh, and leggings made from the skin of human legs, a belt made of nipples, a corset fashioned from a female torso. Faces, carefully preserved, were mounted on the walls like hunting prizes. Gein had been collecting these gruesome artifacts for years, raiding fresh graves under the cover of darkness. He sought out women who resembled his mother, exhuming their bodies to bring them home. The house was a shrine to his macabre obsession, a desperate attempt to reconstruct the one woman he could never escape. When questioned, Ed spoke like a child, calm, polite, detached. He confessed to 2 murders and to grave robbing. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia and psychosis. He didn't kill for pleasure. He killed for love, a love twisted into madness. In the sterile, quiet interrogation room, Gein recounted his actions with an eerie lack of emotion. He explained his grave robbing as a way to surround himself with a female presence, a replacement for his mother. He spoke of his desire to create a woman suit, a way to literally crawl inside the skin of a woman and become her. This wasn't the work of a calculated, sadistic predator. It was the desperate, fragmented logic of a mind shattered by loneliness and a toxic, all-consuming attachment to his deceased mother. He wasn't evil in the way a movie villain is. His evil was born of profound mental illness, a deep, pathological grief that had warped his perception of reality, love, and death itself. In 1958, Ed Gein was declared legally insane and sent to a mental institution. He spent the rest of his life there, quiet, cooperative, and content. He died in 1984, buried beside his mother, the woman he could never let go. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity, sparing him from prison and the electric chair. At the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, he was known as a model patient. He did odd jobs, was polite to the staff, and mostly kept to himself. The man who had horrified a nation now lived a simple, structured life, seemingly at peace. Perhaps in the confines of the institution, he finally found the stability he never had. Or perhaps the monster had simply gone dormant. He never again showed any violent tendencies. He passed away from respiratory failure at the age of 77, and his body was laid to rest in the Plainfield cemetery, just feet away from the mother who had defined his entire tragic existence. He inspired Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill. Ed Gein changed horror forever, showing that true terror lives not in monsters, but in the human mind. Robert Bloch's 1959 novel Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock's subsequent film masterpiece drew directly from Gein's story: the isolated man, the overpowering mother, the shocking final reveal. The brutal, skin-wearing killer Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a direct reflection of Gein's grotesque craftsmanship. Even the complex, terrifying Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs borrowed elements from Gein's desire to become a woman. Before Gein, horror was often about vampires, werewolves, and creatures from outer space. After him, the genre turned inward, exploring the terrifying possibility that the most frightening monsters were our neighbors, our family, the quiet man down the road. He proved that reality could be far more disturbing than fiction. Ed Gein was not evil by birth. He was made by pain, isolation, and obsession. He turned grief into madness and love into horror. And that's what makes his story unforgettable. He was the product of a uniquely toxic environment, a domineering, fanatically religious mother, and a secluded, lonely upbringing that severed him from normal human connection. His story is a chilling reminder of how a mind can break under the weight of unresolved trauma and psychological torment. He represents a terrifying intersection of mental illness, profound loneliness, and morbid fixation. The horrors he committed were not random acts of violence. They were the final, desperate symptoms of a life defined by psychological decay. His legacy is a dark mirror, forcing us to confront the unsettling truth that the capacity for such darkness resides not in some supernatural evil, but within the fragile, complex landscape of the human psyche. This is IntellectAxis, where we uncover the dark truths behind the stories that shaped our world. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey. If you found this analysis compelling, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to explore more of the hidden corners of history with us.